Is that light red on there? Okay. Not flashing. If it's flashing, it's not on. It's muted. In this case, red means good. And I'm colorblind. That's the point.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Natasha Napier, and I am the Program Manager in District 180.
And my name is Matthew Courtney. I'm the CSI consultant here at the department.
We have a lot of information to share with you today related to targeted and comprehensive support and improvement schools. Our primary objective today is simply that you will be able to explain the school improvement procedures for schools designated as Targeted Support and Improvement, or TSI, or Comprehensive Support and Improvement, CSI schools. To accomplish our objective, we have several items on today's agenda. We're going to begin with a quick conversation, some context on how we got here, how we're transitioning from old identifiers to the new associated with our accountability system. We're going to give you a quick overview of the entrance and exit criteria related to TSI and CSI, as well as additional implications. And then at the end, we'll tie up some loose ends by answering the questions that you have for us. So let's begin with how we got here. How are we moving from, or why are we moving from the old language of priority schools and focus schools to that of targeted support and comprehensive support and improvement schools? So it was ESSA, or the Every Student Succeeds Act, that laid that foundation for us. It created the framework. And from ESSA, that influenced our state plan. It also influenced the contents of Senate Bill 1 in 2017, specifically KRS 160.346, which is the statute that outlines the turnaround process for our TSI and CSI schools. And then from there, the statute had great bearing or influence on the school improvement procedures and the regulation. On this screen, two key takeaways, if I were you, that I would focus on here would be the statute, KRS 160.346, that outlines the entrance criteria for TSI and CSI schools, and then also the regulation, which outlines the exit criteria for CSI and TSI schools. So let's get started. We're going to begin with a focus on TSI, or Targeted Support and Improvement. And like I shared earlier, we'll discuss the entrance and exit criteria as well as implications. So for Targeted Support and Improvement, there are two key tiers associated with this specific identification. So in that first column, you're seeing Tier 1 TSI, which is indicative of those schools that are in the early warning category. And you're also seeing Tier 2 TSI, which are our low performing schools. If you're looking in the statute, remember I shared that that's where the entrance criteria was listed, you won't find the tier language. Instead, that's language that we're using internally to kind of separate these two identifications. But again, when you look in the statute, you're going to see a letter A and a letter B associated with these tiers. So we're actually going to start with Tier 2. And it's very obvious why, because if you see there in the description, it states that beginning in 2018-2019, we'll be identifying these Tier 2 TSI schools. These are denoted as low performance schools related to subgroups. So the specific entrance criteria for TSI Tier 2 schools are as follows, and this definition is right there on your screen. The school has at least one subgroup whose performance in the state accountability system is at or below the summative performance of all students in any of the lowest performing 5% of all schools. So for this year, this academic year, we did identify low performing TSI schools based on those subgroups. Beginning in 2020-2021, we're also going to identify TSI schools who meet this criteria. This is a school that has at least one subgroup whose performance in the state accountability system is at or below the summative performance of all students in any of the lowest performing 10% of all schools for 2 consecutive years. And again, that identification won't begin until 2020-2021 because we need 2 years worth of data to identify the bottom 10% who have subgroup issues. So you'll hear us say this a lot. What gets a school into that specific identification also gets that school out of that specific identification. So this is the TSI exit criteria, and just like before, we're going to begin with the Tier 2 TSI because this is the group that we have identified for this particular school year. So schools who are Tier 2 low-performing TSI schools, they'll exit when the specified subgroup moves above the performance of all students in the bottom 5% of all schools in comprehensive support and improvement and demonstrates continued progress. So you have to satisfy both of those. You have to move above the bottom 5% of CSI schools, and the school must show continued progress, meaning that the school can't simply default out. It has to actually have a performance that shows progress, that the scores were better than the previous year of identification. And then for Tier 1, once we begin identifying these early warning groups, these schools will exit when the specified targeted subgroup moves above the performance of all students in the bottom 10% of all schools in CSI. And this one has some caveats to it. If a school is a Tier 1 TSI school, it's written into statute that the district can also set additional exit criteria besides the minimum that you're seeing there on your screen. So this is important. What are the implications? Now that schools and districts are beginning to learn which schools have been denoted a CSI or TSI school, what next? And that's what we're here to share with you today. So one implication is that the TSI school's improvement plan, how it's going to better that subgroup, it's embedded in its CSIP. So it's not a separate plan, but rather part of a plan that's already in development. The LEA monitors and supports the TSI school's implementation of the TSI improvement plan. So locally, the district is responsible for ensuring that that TSI school is implementing its improvement plan. And then lastly, and this is key and very important because it's different than what we're used to with previous schools identified as focus schools. If a school does not exit its TSI Tier 2 status within 3 years, it automatically rolls into CSI status, which has more intensive implications.
So now we're going to roll over and we're going to transfer from TSI into our CSI designations. And just like we did with our TSI schools, we're going to talk about entrance criteria, exit criteria, and then additional implications for those identifications. So we're going to start with our CSI exit or entrance criteria. We have 3 categories of CSI that we'll be identifying. The first one is our CSI Tier 1, which is the bottom 5% of all schools based on our state's accountability model. The second tier, CSI Tier 2, is for high schools with a 4-year cohort graduation rate less than 80%. And the third is our CSI 3, schools identified for TSI 2, the bottom 5%, who fail to exit after 3 years. An important designation on this screen is that for CSI Tier 1, for high schools, we're looking at the average of your 4- and 5-year cohort graduation rate for that indicator. But for CSI 2, because this meets a federal definition, we're only able to look at the 4-year cohort graduation rate for that less than 80%. Similar to TSI, to exit CSI, it's the same rule. What gets you in also gets you out. So for CSI 1, schools will exit CSI Level 1 when they have a summative performance above the bottom 5% of all Title I schools and non-Title I schools and demonstrate continued progress on the data that serve for the basis for identification. For CSI 2, schools will exit when they have a graduation rate, 4-year cohort graduation rate, above 80% for Title I or non-Title I high schools and demonstrates continued progress on the data that serve for the basis for identification. In CSI Level 3, schools will exit when all student groups' performance is above all students in any of the lowest 5% of Title I or non-Title I schools and demonstrates continued progress on the data that serves as the basis for identification. So this mirrors the CSI exit criteria very closely. What gets you in, gets you out. Again, this has that demonstrates continued progress piece, so we're looking to make sure that our schools show progress in all 3 indicators along the way. in order to exit. So you're not going to exit just by bumping out of the bottom 5% because other schools performed lower. You have to show growth in all three indicators. On the screen are some implications related to CSI status. So upon identification, the authority of your school council is suspended and all of that authority is transferred to the superintendent. Identification triggers a school and district audit, which we'll review in a moment. CSI schools are asked to create a turnaround plan that must be approved by both the LEA and the Commissioner of Education. And CSI schools who do not make annual progress for 2 consecutive years or exit status after 3 years will receive more rigorous intervention that we'll discuss again in a moment. So on the screen you see some key features of the school audit. When a team comes in to conduct your school audit, they're going to be looking for these things. So they're going to be looking to find a diagnosis for the causes of low performance with an emphasis on underperforming subgroups. So even though CSI is a school-wide identification, we're still looking at those subgroups to make sure that every student is being served. An assessment and recommendation of the superintendent and principal's capacity. That's really a leadership capacity recommendation. Does the superintendent and the principal have the capacity to lead that turnaround effort? An assessment of the interaction and relationship among the superintendent, central office personnel, and the school principal. In other words, we're going to be looking to see, does central office staff, does the superintendent have a meaningful relationship that supports the work of the principal in the school? The team will make a recommendation of the steps that the school may implement to launch and sustain a turnaround process. So these won't be necessarily required steps, but they're suggestions. These are some things that the school might want to do and think about as they write their turnaround plan. And then the team will also make a recommendation to the local Board of Education of turnaround principles and strategies necessary for the superintendent to assist the school with turnaround. When the audit team comes, on the screen you'll see a list of things that they're going to be looking for. So that audit team is going to be looking at an analysis of state and local education data. They're going to be looking at the principal's capacity. They're going to be reviewing CSIP and other governing documents in that building, such as SBDM policies and things like that. They'll be doing interviews with stakeholders, including parents, students, SBDM members, school and LEA personnel, as well as community members. They'll be doing direct classroom observations. There will be administration of surveys of working conditions and perception surveys for students and families. They'll be looking at SBDM minutes and agendas, and then any other information deemed necessary by the commissioner. And this could include things like information from past audits or financial information that has been audited. If you've had audits from other federal programs, those might be included in this school audit as well. On the screen, you'll see some of the key areas for the capacity recommendation. When that team comes in to make that principal and superintendent capacity recommendation, they're going to be looking to see if those leaders maintain and communicate a visionary purpose and direction, if they lead and operate the school under governance and leadership style that promotes and supports student performance and system effectiveness. They'll be looking to see if they've established a data-driven system for curriculum, instructional design, and delivery, ensuring that the systems are in place for accurate collection and use of data, ensuring that systems are in place to allocate human and fiscal resources to support improvement and ensure success for all students, and implements a comprehensive assessment system to guide continuous improvement. So that's a brief overview of the leadership pieces that will be reviewed by the team to make those capacity recommendations. Just like the school will have an audit, the district level will also have an audit. On the screen you can see what that audit consists of, and it's essentially all of the same pieces of information that we looked at for the school audit. Here are the district capacity recommendations, and you can see that they are almost exactly the same as those principal capacity recommendations, so really looking at that leadership capacity at the district level. Here's a list of who will be on the audit team. Care will be taken to ensure that the audit team represents a well-rounded mix of education professionals with different experience and lenses. So the chair of your audit team will be a certified administrator approved by the department, or it could also be a certified administrator member of the review team. So it can be an additional person to your review team, or it can be your administrator assigned to your review team. In addition to that chair, you'll have a school improvement specialist, a teacher who's actively serving or has served in the last 3 years, a principal who is actively serving or has served within the last 3 years, another administrator at the LEA or district level, the parent or guardian of a school-age child, and a university representative who's actively serving or has served within the last 3 years. So again, we're looking to make sure that that whole spectrum of the education professions is represented here, and we have as many lenses as possible as we go into a school. After your audit is complete, an audit report will be created, including capacity recommendations, and all of that is submitted to the Commissioner of Education. The Commissioner has 30 days to review those findings, and then will notify the school, the district or charter governing board, and any other relevant leaders in that district in writing within 30 days, so that everyone can have an understanding of what that audit found. A key component of this is that the superintendent will then make any necessary determinations regarding principals or other certified staff. So when that leadership capacity recommendation comes down, it comes as a recommendation from the team to the commissioner and a recommendation from the commissioner to the superintendent. But the final decision regarding leadership in that building is left to the superintendent. After your audit is complete, the school will create a turnaround plan. You'll establish a team, and that team will create your plan. So you have 3 options for creating your turnaround team. The first is to do a request for proposals for a private entity, so someone who can come in and support that work. You can establish a team on your own using local staff or community partners, or you can work with KDE, and we will help to provide a team to support this work. Your turnaround plan, just like that TSI plan, will be embedded in your CSIP, and it will include these elements. It'll include evidence-based interventions to increase student performance and address critical needs identified by the audit. It will include a comprehensive list of people and entities involved in the turnaround efforts and the roles they will play. We're especially looking here for conflicts of interest and how the school is going to work around those conflicts of interest to resolve them. It will also include a review of resource inequities that must include an analysis of school-level budgeting to ensure resources are adequately channeled towards school improvement. Once that plan is done, that plan will be submitted to the LEA, who will approve and commit resources to the plan. So the school isn't in this on their own. The district is expected to support this turnaround plan through its entirety. And then the LEA will submit that plan to the commissioner for review and approval. The commissioner may find the plan insufficient, and in that case, he will work with the LEA to make the necessary changes to beef up the plan. A couple of other key pieces to note about CSI schools. So we mentioned earlier that SBDM Council authority is suspended and transferred to the principal, and that team will become an advisory leadership team. The advisory leadership team has the same requirements as an SBDM related to minority membership as well as public meetings, but their responsibilities are a little different. Their responsibilities are to provide a support for capacity building, to promote culture and climate in that building, and to continue the use of data-driven decision-making. So that team's job is really to advise leadership along the way. There will be periodic monitoring of these plans, and so the annual monitoring will include, at a minimum, on-site support by KDE staff, an annual review of state accountability data, review of indicators of school quality. That could be things like teacher-student attendance or behavior records, and then other measures deemed necessary by KDE to ensure compliance with ESSA. So this is the first year that we're rolling out this component of ESSA in Kentucky, and so we will be monitoring, and there may be additional measures that have to be added in order for us to be compliant with ESSA as we get deeper into it. And then there will be periodic review along the way, periodic site visits and direct observations and interviews. There may be other kinds of reporting and data reporting templates that are sent to KDE for periodic quarterly or biannual analysis. I mentioned in the beginning of my section that schools who do not exit within 3 years or do not make annual improvement for 2 years will receive more rigorous intervention. And that intervention includes an additional school audit. It includes on-site assistance from department staff, and the evaluation and modification of the turnaround plan. So if progress isn't being made, then those KDE staff members are going to come in and take a look at the plan, see what we're doing in that school, what the school said they were going to do, and then make whatever modifications necessary to continue on that turnaround process. Districts will also receive an additional audit if a school does not exit CSI status, but regardless of the number of CSI schools served, no district will receive more than one audit every 2 years. So if a district has a CSI school enter this year and then another one next year and neither of them exit, they will not have 2 back-to-back audits during those more rigorous intervention periods. It'll just be once every 2 years until those schools have exited. On the screen, you see a condensed timeline of everything that we just talked about. So I'm going to run through that real briefly, and then we'll take some questions. So the first thing that's going to happen is data is released and schools are notified that they have been identified as CSI, and that happened yesterday, and that data will go to the public tomorrow. Within 30 days of notification of identification, the LEA must declare their intent to use KDE or another option for their audit, and to use KDE or another option for their turnaround team. Within 45 days of identification, the school and district audits must be scheduled. An important note here is that means literally scheduled on the calendar. And the audit doesn't have to be completed within 45 days. And in fact, we don't expect audits to be completed well into the spring. After completion of school and district audits, and within 30 days of receiving the audit findings, the commissioner will notify the school and district and other leadership of those audit findings and those capacity recommendations. And then the superintendent or charter governing board can make those necessary determinations. And then within 30 days from the release of audit findings, you will establish your turnaround team. They will develop a plan, present that plan to the LEA for approval, and submit it to the commissioner for approval. We're going to pause now and take some questions. So do we have some?
Currently have 3.
Okay, we've got 3 questions.
First one, could you elaborate on what demonstrates continued progress means?
Sure. You want to take it or you want me to?
Go ahead.
Okay. So to demonstrate continued progress, what we're looking for is that all 3 of those indicators that were used to put your school into CSI or TSI status have moved. So whatever those cut scores were this year, that's going to be considered your baseline, and we want to see all 3 of those scores above that baseline. That language is that way, so as we mentioned earlier, so that schools don't default out of TSI or CSI status because new schools perform lower in the accountability system. So it is feasible that you could be a CSI school who's actually in the bottom 7%, but you haven't exited because you haven't made enough progress. You haven't made any progress above those cut scores that were used for this year's identification.
And that the same applies for TSI as well. When showing continued progress, it's simply that the school has shown improvement from the scores that it began with to get it into that identification.
Okay. Will additional schools be added to the CSI list each year based on each year's K-Prep data?
Yes, so we will identify new cohorts of CSI schools every year, and it's an important note is that it's not based on K-Prep data, it's based on that accountability profile. So all 3 of those indicators and the cut scores that were established by the standard setting committee.
And the final one so far, what happens if you are a TSI school and the subpopulation that was identified as underperforming drops below the required 10 students per grade level? Do you exit?
That's a great question, one which we don't have the answer to yet, but we have posed that to the Office of Assessment and Accountability to get their feedback there. In that instance, what happens if you don't have enough students to truly move yourself out of that category? And we are compiling a frequently asked questions document that we will be posting to our website. So that's one of the questions that will be addressed on that document.
And I think it's important to note that that's really a federal compliance issue for us. And so we are having to do a little research and digging to see how we would be in compliance if that situation were to happen. We'll give you just a second to type any additional questions. While we do that, on the screen, I just want to show you some resources that we referenced today. So you see 703 KAR 5280. That is the school improvement regulation that includes all of those details about what happens after you're identified as TSI or CSI. KRS 16346, that is the statute that describes how you enter TSI or CSI status. We would also encourage you to look at the Kentucky State Plan and the TSI or CSI sections of the Every Student Succeeds Act for some more information specifically around those compliance pieces and some Kentucky specific details that we've discussed today. And then finally on the screen, you'll see our contact information. I am Matthew Courtney, and I'll work with you to support you through comprehensive support and improvement as well as evidence-based practices. And the other name on the screen is Ruth Swanson. She is our targeted support and improvement as well as our Hub Schools consultant. And so you can email any of us at any time if you have more specific questions. You can also email our generic District 180 inbox, which is district180@education.ky.gov.
And Ruth's extension has changed. It's actually 4023. 4023.
Okay. Do we have any other questions?
No, none at this time.
All right.
Thank you for joining us.